Welcome back to another episode of Christian Natural Health. Today, I am excited to have Reverend David Peterson with us. Reverend Peterson is an ordained pastor and a board certified chaplain with over 30 years of experience in ministry into congregations, as well as chaplaincy experience in hospitals, fire and EMS, law enforcement, and hospice. He's provided emotional and spiritual care on the scenes of devastating events from 9/11 to school shootings and various community tragedies. And in 1994, he founded Shepherd Staff Pastoral Services, where he was able to provide spiritual care to thousands via chaplains he trained and placed at long-term care facilities across the U.S. A study in resiliency and forgiveness, David has lived all his life with tremors in his hands and arms and navigated the bullying, harassment, and embarrassing moments that it has invited from those who lack understanding and empathy. At the age of 12, he was targeted by a neighborhood pedophile who used alcohol, pornography, and affirmation to abuse him sexually, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. Years of silence, anger, shame, and self-destructive behaviors followed before healing and forgiveness transformed him. David and his wife, Arden, as well as their 4 sons and their families, reside in Chesapeake, Virginia. Welcome, David. Thanks so much for joining us.
Dr. Lauren, what an honor to be with you today.
Thank you so much. So that's an incredible story. So that's absolutely amazing. Tell us a little bit about your journey for forgiveness. Like, I don't know how somebody would go about, transforming everything that you've been through. So how did you do it, and how do other people do it?
Well, first off, it's not a me. It's completely. I couldn't imagine doing this without the Lord, because God's presence in my life has brought me the greatest measure of comfort while I was going through it, through the difficulties, as well as provided the change to get me moving in the direction that He would have for me. And that's a direction that leads to a much more transparent and real and connecting husband, father, pastor, and all that I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's only by Him.
Absolutely. And so I think so often when we see these impossible mandates in scripture, the way that we do it is we don't do it by our own strength. We have to learn to rely on Him. But sometimes that can feel like a Christian platitude, though. So how does somebody go about actually relying on Him? Like, what do you tell people when they struggle with that?
Well, all I could do is share from my own story. And, I had to come to realize that there was a point in my life, it was around 35 or so. And now I'm married and I have, at that point, 2 kids. And I come to realize that I have symptoms of unforgiveness that are just, brewing in my life. And I had to come to realize that I had some things that I really needed to surrender to the Lord and for Him to get a hold of. And I had to realize that I was a junkie. I was addicted to unforgiveness, and that can happen.
Right.
And so, like many folks in the 12-step program, recognizing you have a problem is the first step, and then surrendering and saying, God, I can't do this without you. What I had, Dr. Lauren, I had like a nuclear power plant that was inside of me, and it was always energy. It was always manufacturing more anger and more bitterness, and it provided its own anger, energy source. And what I've come to encounter is an authenticity in my relationships with others, including with myself and God, that doesn't repel folks, but welcomes them into my space in a healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really curious what you mean by that when you say you were addicted to unforgiveness. What was it doing for you, quote unquote, that you were getting from it that made you not want to give it up?
Oh, I mean, when you realize that there is a true energy source in keeping that anger brewing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And going back to it, and but my identity, I came to realize, is not in that. It's not in what I had been through. My real identity is in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And I wanted to come to know, experience the identity that was me and Jesus.
Right.
And not me and the anger, although, the reality of what I'd been through was very real. And there's, I'm sure, plenty of listeners that you have. And I just want to speak to those folks right now and say, your experience is real, it's believed, and but it doesn't have to hold you captive. Amen. And sometimes we get hooked on that. Like I said, it gives us the extra strength to make it through, to toughen up as we think, to survive on various levels. And I had to come to realize there's a price to pay for that fabricated energy. And it plays out in our own well-being physically. We've come to realize that there are physical effects that come into being because of unforgiveness and resentment, and anger that grates on our physical, our whole GI tract, our circulatory system, our cardiac level, as well as our emotional, our mental. There's a mental level. And if you spend all your time trying to compress this, contain it, it moves out in depression or anxiety or whatever. So it just has mental, emotional, physical price tags. And moving forward in the line of forgiveness. And, there's a lot of pastors and well-meaning people, you probably experienced, Doctor, that are like, well, you just have to forgive. Right. You talk about a platitude, right? Exactly. Look, is that any different than the Pharisees that, Jesus talked about, woe unto you, you heap up heavy packs upon, the backs of men, and you don't do a thing to lift them off. Just simply saying, well, you have to forgive. And, Jesus talks about forgiveness. But, I love about it, if you stop and look, he models forgiveness. Yes. Right? I mean, here we are, we're in Lent, we're going to come up into Holy Week, and we face the cross. And Jesus, when he encounters such absolute devastation on so many levels, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There's a first step. And so one of my, I have 21 milestones to freedom, and one of them I claim that forgiveness is your chance to play God.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I like to play God. I think about Jim Carrey and, some of those movies where he is.
Yeah, when Bruce Almighty. I need to watch
Bruce Almighty, I had to think of it. Yeah, you're right. And really, if we want to have a chance to play God and experience that, we can only do that with his power and his authority that's inside of us. To say, I forgive you. It does not negate what you have been through.
Absolutely.
And that person may not deserve to be trusted again. But not everybody that hurts us or offends us absolutely intended to do that. And there's minor infractions. Even just the minor folks, the folks chip us off, or, I call them sandpaper people.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you ever done that where you cut out a little, gingerbread man and out of sandpaper? There are people in our lives that are just, man, somehow they just they just grade us the wrong way, but it's making us stronger. It's making us shine that much more. But there truly are predators out there. Don't deserve your trust.
Right.
They need to face justice, whether it's in a criminal court system, legal system, or however that is. All right. But then there's also folks, look, one of the greatest things Jesus said when he taught his disciples to pray was, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. What's that? It's basically a boundary violation. That's what a trespass is. And so sometimes we're going to say, hey, knock it off.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's also forgiveness. Now, another thing that Jesus taught Peter, when he was approached, well, how many times do I need to forgive? Well, you may need to forgive over and over and over. And the forgiving journey is not smooth. At the front cover of my book, it has, I think the shot is from the Appalachian Trail. Mm-hmm. And there are challenges, there are threats along the way on that journey of forgiveness. But it's you take one step at a time. And I just tried to do some milestones of, like I said, of things that I found helpful. And I just pray that your listeners, those you connect with, have a chance to encounter this book, because I continue to learn from this book.
Yeah, sometimes. Absolutely. Very cool.
Praise God.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how forgiveness is not the same as like that whole forgive and forget thing. What do you say to that phrase? Does that mean what it sounds like? What's that all about?
In the development of this book, one of the things I came to realize was not just 21 milestones, but the brain science that goes along with it. And you might find it really interesting, as I did when I was researching it and coming to realize things like dopamine, one of our brain chemicals, has an end goal in mind, and it propels us toward that. Mm-hmm. And as part of our forgive and forget, there's some things we don't want to be hurt again in a particular way, and especially if we're violated at a very deep level. Good thing to know, as far as that goes. But really, the dopamine that's swirling around in our brains will either propel us toward an end goal of reconnecting, ideally with someone in a healthy relationship in a healthy way, and pursue that wholeness, or it can propel us in the other direction, which is exacting vengeance on that person. And to ruminate about that, and to think about, okay, first I'm gonna punch their lights out, then I'm gonna do this, and then all the way down. How am I gonna get back at them? What this does is it gives us a chance not to be latched on, not to be hooked on to that person, because God wants us to live lives that are free of that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just as simply, forgiveness is something, you probably heard this before, we do for ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, in the intro, I start with a little story called Unforgiveness is Monkey Business. Mm. And it's a fun story that goes like this. In Africa, they're having a problem with monkeys. Mm-hmm. And so the townspeople didn't want to hurt these monkeys, but they didn't want them wreaking havoc. Right. And so have you heard this story before?
Go ahead.
So they had to find a way of dealing with them in a humane way. And so somebody figured out that if you take a little jar and you put a little bit of banana or fruit in there,
Yeah.
and you attach that jar to a tree, that the monkey would come along and put his hand in that jar
Oh,
and won't have a sense of opening his hand and
let go.
escaping. Can't let it go.
Oh, yeah.
And so I talk about unforgiveness is monkey business, because it's just then that somebody is able to come and either wipe them out or, deal with them in another way.
Right.
Forgiveness, but simply that act of letting go, it really isn't just a self thing. We really need the Lord's help in letting go, because I don't know about you, and I've got some, man, when you can pry this out of my dead lifeless hand,
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think part of the reason why it's so hard for us to let go and give it to God, or just let go in general, is
Mhm.
because we have that idea of, but they deserve justice. So,
Yeah.
how would you respond to somebody who has that protest?
Don't you think God has ways
Hmm.
of exacting justice in much better ways than, and more creative ways
True.
than
Absolutely.
you or I could ever do that?
Mhm.
I think about the story in Genesis about Joseph. You,
Yes. Oh, that's such a good story.
isn't it a great story? Could you imagine Joseph? We hear about when his brothers come back, he
Yeah.
realizes it's just is a basket case, just weeping and everything. But for him to be able to say, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good,"
Yeah.
and that God had dealt with them, and isn't that? I mean, and to think that we aren't sinners ourselves, to think that we aren't sinners, don't we learn lessons like that? In fact, that's one of my uh 21 milestones. It's the first one, is to see the offending sinner as a $20 sinner, and I'm a $20 million sinner.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting necessarily into the ways that I was violated, but when we stop and think, well, we have no sin. Jesus told the story about the guy, and you know where I'm going with this, about the guy who was tossed into prison, and he owed this huge amount, and then he's forgiven that huge amount. That's the $20 million. And then he goes out, and what's he do? He shakes down a $20 offender and says, "You got to go in there." And so the king hears about it and says, "Hey, buddy,
Yeah, exactly.
I forgave you so much, and you can't even forgive that." Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So, what if somebody says, okay, I'm going to forgive, and with the Lord's help, we're moving forward into that, but they're still angry and they're still hurt? What do you say to
Yeah.
somebody that is experiencing that stage of the process?
Dr. Lauren, all I can say is it's a day by day, and sometimes 5 minutes at a time, or in my case, 1 minute at a time. And from the moment, there's a while there from the moment I opened my eyes, I had to say, "I submit this to you, Lord," and say, "You are Lord. Jesus is Lord. I need you to come and be Lord over this area of my life." Um, there's another, one of my milestones where I talk about, yes, we will go back and we will rethink it. We'll rehash it as if it could have been any different. And maybe it could have been. Um, but perhaps the Lord has something he wants us to know about that event. And our ability to ruminate and go back and chew on stuff maybe is just our way of still trying to make sense of what happened, the unresolved feelings that we have. And maybe it's an opportunity to say, Lord, you know what happened to me when I was whatever, how old. You were there when it happened. Is there something you want me to know about that experience? Or is there some way you want to show me where you were and what you were doing when that happened? And I just have found so much freedom because maybe the Lord just happens to show you that very thing. And maybe he shows you something. And maybe for the first time, you sense his presence. You sense that he was there. He was protecting you, or, he was keeping you from being further hurt. If we say that, one of the most basic tenets of theology is that God is omnipresent, that means he was there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So those are some ways that I've learned to deal with it and surrendering it to him and going to him.
Absolutely. And it's almost like what you're describing to me. It's anytime I'm trying to hook up to a greater power source for whatever it is that I can't do myself, it's an act of faith that I recognize that I have the ability to draw on that power. And it's the process of telling yourself, speaking the word over yourself so that it drops from head to heart. And you're doing that as an act of faith, where eventually it will get down deep so that you can actually bear the fruit of forgiveness in this particular case. But
well, you set me up so well.
It's good.
I must have read the book already. Because, one of my 21 milestones is to make a bold declaration. I release you from my wrath. And it's the third milestone. I don't know about you, but I've found that when I start ruminating, or that I go back and I start rethinking it and rehashing it. I need to make a verbal declaration out loud. And look, with what you do, you can probably explain this better than me. I just discovered it and thought, wow, this works. But if I say it out loud, I release you from my wrath. It's going from my mind and my heart and the process of that. I'm getting it out, and then I'm hearing it and I'm taking it in.
Right, absolutely. Death
and it works so well.
Yes, for sure. It's amazing how strong it is, the power of our tongues. And Solomon talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Is what we say, we begin to believe it, for sure.
I wish you'd been with me while I was writing this book, because I can tell you have wonderful insights.
Well, thank you very much. So what can you tell us about, from like a DNA standpoint or a family experience standpoint, how does the way that we've seen forgiveness or unforgiveness modeled influence the way that we forgive or don't forgive others?
Well, I mean, it's the culture in which, it's that nature versus nurture thing. We do see things modeled. I just happen to think that we're constantly teaching our kids. And we teach them how to tie their shoes. We teach them, how to feed themselves. What if we learned how to teach them how to forgive? And, my understanding from my research is that from conception, according to memory theorists, from the time of conception all the way up until 10 or 12 years old, there's an imprint based upon the significant events that we go through. That imprint on our psychosocial, emotional well-being, that propels us on a trajectory that carries us up into adulthood and through the rest of our lives. And so if we have deep pains and hurts, that really does. You talk about generational curses and generational sin. And I long for a generation. I long for a generation to know the freedom. And we see that there's so much in our culture. Just the other day, I heard from someone that says, I hate that person. I will never forgive them from somebody, and then turn around and saw me standing there and goes, oh.
Shouldn't say it in front of you.
I should, not just because I'm a pastor, but because I had just written this book.
Oh, yeah.
But hey, I can slip into that too. Any of us can, right?
Absolutely.
And we learn from our parents. We see this, from our generations, from the people that we love very much. I just happen to believe that the Lord wants to set us free. Imagine how we can live so free and share so much with such a broken world. And, I believe God longs for his people to walk in that freedom.
I agree. And so is forgiveness something that we can get better at over time? Does it get faster as you've, been through more things than when you recognize that you are holding on to unforgiveness? Do you let it go now faster than you did when you first had this revelation?
I guess finding the tools, having the tools, better equips me.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think about having Teflon, where stuff just doesn't seem to stick as much. It goes out to the people that I relate with, and it could be my own family, it could be with the folks that help me out at the local deli. If they sense the fruit of the Spirit of peace, even when I may be upset about something and I'm thinking about any other number of things, but they get what they need. The Lord provides that, and that's the gift, that's the fruit of the Spirit, that they're just able to come and get whatever is needed at their time of need. And if that makes it that much easier for them to receive the fruit that they need to help them in their circumstances, man, that's a Jesus thing. I could never manufacture that. I sure couldn't do it in some phony way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely true. So how do we know once we've forgiven someone, if we should reconcile or if we should maintain boundaries? How would you answer that? Like what kind of, if there's any criteria? I'm sure it's a case by case scenario.
Yeah, I think it is. I think healthy boundaries, we've heard some wonderful, stuff come from some very, very talented authors on having healthy boundaries. It makes for good, healthy relationships, but also helps us to be more authentic and more transparent in claiming. We had this term in some of my chaplaincy training, claiming yourself, and claiming your place and everything. There's definitely a healthiness in that, and I believe God wants us, because when Jesus said, to the man, love God and love your neighbor as yourself, he didn't say love your neighbor more than yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It was to love both yourself and love your neighbor. And there's a sense in which I believe loving ourselves. You know how many people I talk with, and especially I do a lot of men's ministry, and I'm not ashamed of that. I really enjoy having a chance to minister to guys. Do you know how few of them are able to look in the mirror and say, I love you?
Hmm. Wow.
I don't know what your experience is, but
Well,
to be able to look in the mirror and say, I love you. And even to start with, I like you.
right. Yeah.
You know that you're a great time. Jesus for some reason thinks I'm a blast. I think he just to keep him laughing.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, the self-talk in our culture is very negative in general. We're almost taught that that's the way that we should behave towards
Mm,
ourselves. So yeah, that's a tough habit to break for a lot of people. Absolutely. Hmm. So, how can we know that we've actually crossed that threshold and truly forgiven someone, or is it always a bit of a back and forth?
you know, in Journey to Forgiveness, 21 Milestones to Freedom, I try and address that question. I think part of it is, does this particular episode of being wronged still take up as much time
Yeah.
in your brain? And I like telling folks, don't let bums take up space in your brain unless they're paying for it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Evict them, right? How much time is spent thinking about that? Imagine what you can do with the time and the energy now that you don't have to think about them. And how much more creative that you can be in that. Think about, and I think it's a fruit of the experience, but there's also, it's a journey to be walked out. It is a journey. And sometimes, look, what are some of the things, if we're hurting physically, if we're, are experiencing loss, or we're experiencing some other kind of pain in our life, or we're sleepy, what's the classics for addiction? If we're hungry, we're sleepy, all of those things that propel us down a road where we're a little bit more tempted. Yeah. Or headed more towards self-medicating or self-pity or any of those things. I think it's being real with ourselves, but I gotta just stress, God loves you so much. And he knows that there are going to be times when you're going to have setbacks and potholes.
Yep.
Times when you're going to wrench your ankle on this journey of forgiveness. And you know what? Just walk in it, embrace it, and, shake it off and move on. Get back up, get going again.
So,
You're resilient. Absolutely.
So, what have I not asked you that you want to make sure you leave with our audience?
Oh, you have grilled me. Dr. Warren, you're gonna, oh my goodness. I don't know how I'm gonna recover. You you're fun. This is very enjoyable. It's a joy to be with you.
Thank you.
Come to know the healing presence of the Lord. And just keep moving. If I can just put that out there, yeah, there's gonna be times. All I can say is, if God can do the work in me, and you read my bio, my testimony. 1 in 6 men were targeted by a pedophile as a child. The statistics say 1 in 4 women were targeted for sexual abuse as children. If you can think of, being in a room, a crowded room, and you think one of six, you have all these folks who are very, very broken. And the real question is, what are they doing? How are they living free? Are they living in forgiveness? Being able to forgive those that wounded them. Unfortunately, with the statistics, and I'll tell you what, I'm thankful because the Lord is the only one who could help me beat the statistics. And it plays itself out in self-medicating. It plays itself out in, relationship disasters, and anybody can have them. It can play itself out in infidelity. It can, ways that we try to cope in our own energy. And all I could say is that if God could do the work in me, and regardless of that, it's like David's smooth stone. If God can take the hard things in our lives, and just like that, those 5 rocks those 5 stones that David bent over and he pulled them out of the stream. Those stones, no doubt, had encountered the water running over them. They'd also encountered the vibration of the water going over them. It knocked the garbage off, and they were just there waiting to be used. So David could come by for such an opportunity and pick up those hard things and pull one out of his shepherd's purse. And he could take that one and he could use that hard thing and he could propel that and get it to its target and slay a giant. And we already know what he do with the other 4. Goliath had 4 brothers.
I was about to say, I've heard that before. Very nice.
And whether he was the one that threw all the stones from that point or somebody else did, if we can all pick up one of those stones, and in our lives, and it brings freedom and wholeness to another human being, there is no experience like that. And I'm seeing that with this book. And it's a simple book. And I just pray that the word gets out. Forgiveness is a really big deal. Jesus was never casual about forgiveness. Right?
Absolutely. So tell us one more time, where can people go to get your book and to find out more about you?
I would love for folks to go check out davidpetersonbooks.com. Okay. David Peterson, and that's with an S-O-N, davidpetersonbooks.com, which will direct you to Amazon. So if you prefer just to go hook up with Amazon, just go take a look at it. There's an author's bio. davidpetersonbooks.com. There's a way to get in touch with me. I'd love to hear your stories, your testimonies, and your thoughts and your ideas. It keeps me going, and I love hearing your testimonies because you're so real. So go check that out. And if you happen to want to catch some of my preaching, it's at apostles-lutheran.org. We're a spirit-filled, Bible-believing, born-again Lutheran church.
Awesome.
Thanks for allowing me to give a little plug. These are the folks that keep me going too.
Yeah, absolutely. I will put all of those links in the show notes for anybody who wants to find them. And thank you so much for all of your wonderful wisdom and for being willing to be so transparent, Pastor David. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Dr. Lauren. Hit me up anytime.
Absolutely. Are you looking for a holistically minded healthcare practitioner who truly treats root cause rather than symptom suppression? Unfortunately, even in the alternative healing professions, this isn't a given. That's why I've created wholehealthdoctor.com, a resource to help connect patients to healthcare practitioners in their area who share a root cause philosophy. Alternatively, most of the practitioners listed also practice telehealth. So if there isn't anyone local to you, you can still find a great practitioner to help you regain optimal health. Go to wholehealthdoctor.com. That's wholehealthdr.com. Type in your location or just the specialty that you're looking for and find the practitioner who's right for you.